Motherhood does not have to be equivalent to martyrdom. It's not our jobs as mothers to completely sacrifice our own well-being for the care of our children and everyone else around us. And yet so often it feels like sacrifice and suffering are the only way. Today, licensed clinical therapist and coach for new moms, Sage Olson, is joining us to talk about breaking out of martyr mom mode to live a more balanced and fulfilled life. Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast, where we discuss all things identity, self-compassion, and fulfillment within and beyond motherhood. I'm Emily Rose Hardy, a mindset and self-love coach for moms. I am a firm believer that to be able to take care of our children, we must take care of ourselves first. This is not a parenting podcast. No, this is a podcast where we will challenge the societal expectations of what it means to be a mom, demystify the perfect mom myth, and learn to love ourselves. You are worthy, mama. Let's do this. Hello and welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. I am so excited today. We are going to be talking about kind of the connection between motherhood and feeling like a martyr of sorts. And we have Sage Olson joining us today. Sage, would you go ahead and just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your story and what you do.
Yes, Emily, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. This is something I could just talk about for just forever, for days on end. So I'm always excited when I have a captive audience that will just let me talk about it, because most people don't want to just hear me ramble about this at like game nights. So my name is Sage Olson. A little bit of my background. So I'm a therapist and a counselor. So I started out as a school counselor with a master's of education. And then from there, I got a master's of social work and I started doing therapy. And I've been working as a therapist for years. For a long time, I was working in the trauma and addictions realm, and I was kind of getting burned out with that. It was very, very heavy, right? I'm dealing with like childhood trauma on a daily basis, and addiction is, anyways. So I kind of found my niche when I left this treatment center I was working at, and I started just accepting clients. And my husband at the end of each day, be like, "How's your day?" I'm like, "Oh, so," I was like, "I loved it. I worked on this and this and this with my clients," obviously not going into detail, but he noticed, he was like, "You get really excited. Like your favorite clients that you work with are the women that you're talking about, like setting boundaries and stopping people pleasing." And it's ridiculous that I had to have him point that out for me to realize, like, oh yeah, that is my favorite people to work with. And so then I was talking to my sister and she just laughed and she's like, "Of course those are your favorite people to work with, because that's you. Like, those are your people." So that's kind of where I realized how much I loved it. And then I became a mom and I realized all of those things that I preached to my clients: boundaries, self-care, not people pleasing, all that stuff. It became a lot harder as a mom, but it also became a lot more important. So I had to get a lot more creative with self-care. Boundaries were not negotiable. Like boundaries weren't just like, "Oh, these are like good to have if you have time." Like, no, it was like, these are necessary for my sanity. And it kind of just set me on this journey of my own self-discovery. So I kind of have morphed my professional experience, working with clients, and my years of experience in the professional field, and my personal experience. And that's where I'm at now. So I help moms start to kind of rediscover their identity within motherhood through setting boundaries, stopping people pleasing, and practicing real self-care and all that fun stuff. So that's me.
I love it. I love getting to hear other women who are in the space of motherhood support. And, what you and I kind of focus on is so similar with, having moms really look at like their boundaries and how they're caring for themselves. But just getting to hear your story of like your professional journey and how you came to realize that was something that was not only important to the people you were working with, but important to yourself as well. And you went through your own journey to like get to share that with others. It's just really exciting, and hearing the passion and excitement in your voice talking about it, it's just so awesome. It's so awesome that we have this kind
Yeah.
of these supports exist out there. It's something that I don't think has always existed for moms. And so it's exciting to know there's women out there who are supporting moms in this capacity. You talk about getting out of martyr mom mode. That's kind of something that is a big part of the work you do. And I'm wondering if you can kind of just break that down. What is martyr mom mode? What does that look like? And how can someone recognize if they are living in that mode?
Yes. Okay. So I have to share a funny story with this first. So I have my own podcast. It doesn't matter to me. So my parents, they're so cute. They're just so supportive. They went on a road trip and they're like, Sage, we listened to one of your episodes. And I was like, oh, which one is it? And I have an episode on there that's called Breaking Out of the Martyr Mom Mode. And so I asked my parents, like, what episode did you listen to? And my dad's just like this old redneck, okay? And he's like, something like like mom mode, mom muggle mode, and I just started laughing. I was like, did you just say mom muggle mode? My dad, I don't even think he's ever seen Harry Potter. I don't know why the word muggle came in there. He just knew that it was an M and was just like throwing words out there. And I was like, martyr mom mode? Yeah, that one. And then it made me happy thinking of like my parents on a road trip listening to this episode about martyr mom mode. But so now every time I think of that, I'm like, muggle mode. So I think I might have like a mom muggle mode podcast, which might just be like Harry Potter. I feel like I need to do it now. And I honestly would love that. Like fellow millennials, we're talking about muggle moms. Join me. Okay. Anyways, that was random, but I just need to share that because it's my favorite thing ever.
So good.
So martyr mom mode, it's this idea when a mother constantly feels the responsibility to take care of the kids or her family while delaying or ignoring her own needs. And I feel like it's kind of morphed into this thing where it's almost like this expected like rite of passage for new moms. And the way we talk about it and the way new moms like talk about being a mom, sometimes it kind of drives me crazy. Like I just like cringe, like, ugh, because it's like this rite of passage and it's expected that like you're a martyr and you're going to be self-sacrificing and like that's your life now. You're a mom. Just deal with it. And like, I remember like when I got pregnant, and I feel like all of us can relate to when you get pregnant and like people just come forward with like random unsolicited advice about everything. And it's like really awkward and uncomfortable. Oh my gosh. Or people are like, hey, do you want to hear my traumatic birth story? And I'm like, no, Barbara, I just met you like 2 minutes ago. I don't want to hear your traumatic birth story. Like, but you always get these comments of just like, oh, well, get plenty of sleep now while you can. Yeah, you should probably go on a baby moon and travel now and go on all the trips while you can, or like when we were first married and people are like, have all the adventures you can now until you have kids. Like it's this idea of like when you have kids, your life is over and everything sucks. Like it drives me crazy. And I feel like it's really emphasized for moms, especially this expectation of like, well, you're a mom now. So your needs are never going to get met and you will constantly be last. And like, you just have to deal with it. This is part of it. So starting to recognize when you're in this mode, first off, you have to want to not be a martyr. So, and I know that sounds like really oversimplified or counterintuitive maybe, but you have to start to recognize of like, okay, I have these needs. I'm feeling burned out. But one, am I communicating what I'm needing? Am I actually reaching out to my support system? Or am I like stuck in the cycle where I'm just like kind of shutting off, or instead of communicating to my partner what I need, I'm just like giving them the silent treatment and like shutting down and hoping they read my mind, And I feel like all of us can relate to that at some point. I totally did that. Sometimes I still do that and I have to catch myself. So you need to start to recognize, like, if you start to feel you're just like burned out and exhausted and you're just like done and you don't have any patience for anything or anyone anymore, that's when you can start to realize like, okay, am I stuck in this martyr mode? When was the last time I did something for me? Now, when I'm saying do something for you, I'm not talking about like go on a spa day, go on a weekend trip, go on vacation. Like, yes, fantastic. Do all that stuff if you can, but that's not realistic for everyone. And also, that's a very temporary fix. I'm talking about just like simple examples of like when you sit down to dinner, do you actually like sit down and make your own plate of dinner for yourself and eat your own dinner? Or do you just like eat your kids' leftovers and sit with your kids and help them? Right? Little things like that. Like you have your kids' doctor's appointments and dentist appointments. They're all scheduled. When was the last time you had your doctor's appointment or your dentist appointment? Or, just start to notice little things like that in your life. And it's kind of one of those things like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you're going to start to notice these things and start to stop yourself and be like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have dinner first, or I'm going to like actually grab my own plate of food and I'm going to actually have my own plate and not just be eating off my kid's plate, and just starting to think of like little examples like that. And I just want to be clear that when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about like girls trip, like go for a weekend, all that stuff. Again, that's fantastic, but that's not always realistic. And we're looking at like everyday changes that you can make.
Yeah, I think there's something in that with kind of what the definition of martyr mom mode is, and thinking about how it's really like the norm and it's what we're kind of told is expected. And so actually recognizing when you're in it, you have to be so intentional to look at that side of things because it's just the norm. It's not something exceptional, right? It's not like, oh, I'm sacrificing for my kids and whoa, whoa, whoa. No, that's just kind of what you're told is going to be happening with all these little messages that you get, right? Like you said, it's not necessarily people saying, oh, you're going to sacrifice everything for them, but it's like whatever the little tiny nuggets that you're getting from outside of you, it just becomes like, this is what I should expect. So you have to, in order to recognize like, this isn't necessarily what I want and this isn't sustainable, you have to actually look at what's happening.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. Like when you talk about it's like it is just the expectation and it's just the norm. So one of my aunts, I was telling my sister and a few of my aunts were there and they overheard. And I was like, oh, I talk about like new moms learning how to practice self-care and set boundaries. And one of my aunts just laughed and she's like, self-care as a mom? Yeah, right. Like when does that happen? And like she was just making a joke, right? And to an extent, like it was funny because we can all relate to feeling like that at times. But yeah, all of my other aunts were just like, yeah, okay, like time for yourself. Good luck with that. And that's very much the attitude. And like one thing to stop is like catch yourself in how you think about it and how you respond to other moms. Okay, if you hear another mom that's like, let's say she's in the newborn stage and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm just so tired because I'm up every 3 hours breastfeeding and then a pump on the other side and I don't know what to do and I'm exhausted. And instead of just being like, oh my gosh, I feel you, I've been there. Sometimes we're like, wait until you have 2 kids. Yeah, you think this is bad? Right? Or we're like, well, I have twins. Yeah, I have twins. And we like do this like weird like one up thing where it's like, oh, yours isn't that bad. Or I've gotten the comment of like, well, enjoy it now because when they're toddlers and they start running around, you're going to miss when they were this small. But then when they're toddlers, you're like, enjoy it now because when they go off to school, you're going to miss having them at home. And that it's like everything. It's like, enjoy it now. And it's so frustrating. And so I've tried to be very aware of how I respond to other moms. And that like when they're venting about something, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I get it. And I just like let them vent. I'm not trying to one up them. I'm not trying to like give them some like cautionary tale. Just let them vent and give them space to vent. And that in and of itself will help you be more aware of your thoughts and help you change your own personal narrative of how you think about motherhood as well.
Yeah, we do almost this like policing of keeping the expectations without trying to necessarily. But when you do comment on things of like, yeah, that's the way it is, and it's just going to get worse, or like, oh, it could be worse, or whatever it is, you really are contributing as an individual to these narratives of like, motherhood is sacrifice, motherhood is giving up your own needs for the needs of everybody else. And knowing that, like, also you don't need to feel guilty for like the role you have in that, because it's the expectations we also have taken on from other people. But knowing that, like, when we can interrupt that pattern for ourselves and for others and say, yeah, that is really hard and that's not sustainable. Like, waking up every 3 hours is not, like, that's really hard, and I hear you. I validate that. It changes things in terms of like, this is not sustainable. I'm not saying that this could be worse and like suck it up, because it's not about sucking it up. It's not about just like going along with the things that completely suck and are not something that you can keep up with without burning out, right? Like, that's not helpful to anyone, except for it's helpful in like continuing these established norms and expectations.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like it creates a space where we as moms don't feel like we can vent or don't feel like we can do anything right, because it's so frustrating. Like, it's like, you're like, okay, well, if I need someone to vent because I'm like tired and it's hard, then you'll either get the response of like, oh, well, if you think it's hard now, wait till potty training, wait till this or whatever, right? There's always going to be something that makes it so you need to just wait for whatever. Or sometimes you'll kind of get the response of like, oh, well, you knew what you were getting into. Like, this is what you signed up for. Which is like, yes, I knew what I signed up for. Yes, I was well aware that being a mom was exhausting. Trust me, everyone and their freaking dog told me and warned me about it when I got pregnant. Like, I was aware of that. That doesn't change the fact that it is. That also doesn't mean that I don't want to be a mom and that I regret it. Like, those two things can be true at the same time. I can recognize that it's hard and exhausting at times and also absolutely love being a mom. And I feel like people, society, like just in general, gets this idea of like, those two things cannot be true at the same time.
Yeah.
You can't vent about how tired you are and how frustrating it is at times and also love it. Like, you must regret being a parent. And then we have like all these like BuzzFeed articles that are like 10 people that talk about why they're happy they're child free, and they're like, I'm so glad I don't have kids, which that's fantastic, that's them. But like, anyways, I'm just rambling now. Do you kind of get what I'm saying?
Totally. Well, and I think it just points out the like how in society we really do hold motherhood as equal to martyrdom. It's like, if you aren't suffering and sacrificing for your kids, you're doing it wrong. And so if you're trying to make it so that you also are sustaining your life and like pouring into yourself and continuing to grow as a human being outside of your role as mother, and you're talking about the hard parts and you're doing these things, it's like, oh, no, you're supposed to be sacrificing. If you liked this, you would be sacrificing. And if you don't like sacrificing everything, well, obviously, why did you have kids? And it's like, that equivalency is false, but it is so, it's so there, it's so present. And I don't think we talk about it enough. I don't think we talk about how these narratives of self-sacrifice, because they're subtle. It's not just like, okay, when you have kids, no one's saying like, you're going to abandon yourself. But like, that is the messages we get in the fact that we're expected to put our kids first for everything. And if you say things, I talk a lot about like putting yourself first as a mom, and just the like, well, no, my kids come first. Like, okay, yes, your kids may be like the most important thing in your life and you would do anything for them, but your needs also have to come first. You have to take care of yourself. And just the responses to that alone, right, just show how much our society is stuck in this place of like really seeing a mother's role as sacrifice.
Yeah, and it's tricky because, one, I also feel like it creates this narrative of like, whenever there's someone who like genuinely does, like, they talk about how much they genuinely do love being a parent, and they genuinely do love being a mom and having kids, I feel like people are always like, but do you really? do you really? And it's like, I've felt that sometimes where I'm like, no, I really do. I'm not just saying that. Like, it can be a positive thing too. But it's a struggle though, because like, as we're talking, I'm thinking like, yes, when you become a mom, there is a lot that you need to sacrifice. When you when you become a parent at all, right?
Yeah.
There is a lot that you need to sacrifice. And your priorities completely change. How you think about the world completely changes. How you view trips completely changes. Like everything shifts. And in a lot of ways, it shifts and does revolve around your kids, right? When someone's like, hey, we're going to go out to eat, my first thought is like, okay, where are we going? Is it kid friendly? Does it have high chairs? Right? Because I don't want to like bring my toddler to a 5-star restaurant that's not kid friendly, because that's, and then you're like, okay. But then you have that whole thought process of like when you're eating, you're like, okay, what do I order for them? What am I going to pack to keep them entertained while we're waiting for the food to come? So they're not like running around the restaurant. Like everything changes. So I want to clarify for those listening, we're not talking about like just ignoring all of that and like putting yourself first and just ignoring your kids. It's finding this balance between sacrificing for your kids and looking out for them while not running yourself into the ground. So it's this knowledge that motherhood is a new part of your identity. It's a very big part of your identity. And it's an addition onto who you already are. It doesn't have to become your whole identity. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I would love to dig into that a little bit more, this identity piece, and what can happen for moms when we do kind of get stuck in this mode of like sacrificing and not pouring into ourselves, not pouring into our own identity. What is that impact on identity, and how do you see that show up for moms?
So that impact of like that identity crisis that moms go through. So I feel like it's like a domino effect, and it can impact every aspect. It can impact your friendships, impact your relationships, your relationship with your partner, your spouse, relationship with your kids, your relationship with yourself. That's a thing too. People always forget, like, you need to have a relationship with yourself. How do you feel about yourself? Yeah, it's something that if you're not careful, motherhood can be all consuming and you start to lose yourself. And that's one thing that I notice with moms that I work with is I'll ask them like, okay, what are your hobbies? What are your interests? What are your passions? And they're like, and they have to like seriously think about it. And I'm like, okay. Sometimes it's even like, hey, what's like your favorite dessert? What do you like to eat? Where do you want to go out to eat? And they're just like, I don't know. And it's like this hesitation because you're so used to thinking of everything in terms of your kids that you forget to think about like, hey, what do I actually like to do? Who am I? And so that's one thing that I'll find with moms is they kind of forget what their passions are and what their hobbies are and what their interests are, because now their interests revolve around like Bluey and Little Einsteins and Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. Those are the three most popular ones in our house right now. Or Miss Rachel. I love Miss Rachel. Miss Rachel's like my co-parent.
Love
so it can be hard to be like, oh, outside of this, what are my hobbies and passions? And it completely has an impact on friendships, right? Starting to look at some of your friendships. I had a podcast interview with someone on my podcast, and Maggie Dickens is her name. She's fantastic. And it was really interesting because her whole platform is talking to women who are unapologetically child-free. And I was like, kind of like, well, why would you want to come on like a podcast about moms? But we had this really cool discussion where we talked about sometimes that gap that child-free women and moms have, and how sometimes it's like they don't feel like they can be friends, or there's like this miscommunication because there's this difference between not having kids and having kids, and how we can bridge that gap. And one of the things that Maggie said on there that I really love is when we start to have conversations with people and you're just like talking and making small talk, and it's natural, we all do this. One of the first things you ask is like, oh, what do you do? Right? And by that, we mean like, what do you do for a job? And, if you either start out with your job title or if you're a stay-at-home mom, you're like, oh, I'm a stay-at-home mom. Oh, okay. Tell me about that. And then you're like, the whole conversation revolves around like your job in your career. And so Maggie talked about switching that conversation up and asking the question, what is something that fires you up? Rather than starting off with a question of like, oh, what do you do? And when she first said that, I was like, that's kind of awkward. Like, that's because that's so different, right? And if someone came up and asked you that, it would totally catch me off guard. I'd be like, I don't know, actually. But I've asked that question, and it is so fun to see the response and the connection and the conversations that I have with people. I mean, one of my husband's coworkers, I asked him this, and he started going off on the recent Mandalorian episode that was just released on Disney Plus. And Emily, are you a Star Wars fan?
Okay, I personally am not, but like my 5-year-old basically only wears Star Wars shirts to school, so I can vibe, I can hang.
Yeah. Me and my husband are like really nerdy into like Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings. And yeah, so hence I like reference Harry Potter and Star Wars now, so that's fantastic. but yeah, he like I was like, what's something that fires you up? And he started going off about this like Mandalorian episode and some plot holes in it, and we were just like talking about Star Wars, and it was such a fun conversation where I was like, oh, this is like one of my interests. This is something fun for me. And I didn't feel like I spent the whole conversation talking about my kids, talking about being a mom. Like it kind of helped me to discover part of my identity outside of that and feel like, oh, I can have a conversation with an adult who doesn't just see me as a mom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And I want to go back to something you said at the beginning of that, of like, when we're making decisions of how to spend our time or what to do or where to go to eat, a lot of times it's just easiest. And sometimes like the better thing to do is to like base those decisions on our kids, right? Like if we're going to go to a restaurant, yeah, probably if we're taking our kids with us, it's probably a good idea to choose a restaurant that is good to have your kids at, because otherwise you're going to be suffering through dinner and it's going to suck. So yes.
And like everyone's going to be judging you.
Totally.
Which people are going to judge you no matter what.
But like if we can minimize it, we could just make it easier for ourselves. Amazing. And when we have the TV on and Bluey is playing because your kids are home, that probably is like, it makes sense, right? It's not like, okay, replace everything that has to do with your kids with things for you. But I think the thing about it is that it can be so easy to just then only make decisions with our kids in mind when it comes to things that aren't so like obvious, right? When it comes to conversations with people, always deferring to our kids because that's such a big part of our life. And okay, I can share about that and keep the conversation interesting in that way or whatever it is. Where if we're not intentionally focusing on like our own identity, because our kids do take up so much space in our brains and in our homes and in our life and our schedules, it's really easy to default to that. And the impact long-term that can have on how we actually see ourselves is huge. And so I think like what an interesting conversation too, to have with someone who is not a mom and has chosen to be child-free, and to see like, yes, we have different things that take up our time and our energy and our priorities, but like we all are still human beings, and we're all still like these individuals with these complex identities that are made up of all the things that we enjoy and all the things that we're passionate about and all the things we care about. As moms, a lot of that has to do with our kids just naturally, but it doesn't take away the fact that we also are these individuals. So I really love all of that. And I think there's so much to take from that in life, about just how to like, even just changing the way you speak about yourself or what you choose to talk about can have an impact, and not trying to eliminate the kids from everything, because that's not realistic, but it really is just making space for anything that is not necessarily kid related, because it's not all kid related, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too with that whole thing about like how I talk to other people
Mm-hmm.
and relationships, it's totally made me reevaluate how I view other moms.
Yeah.
So, I have a lot of mom friends. We have like a little play group that we meet like once a week and all these ladies and I love them. And I had to stop and reflect on like, okay, do I actually know this person or do I just know this person as like this is Asher's mom?
Yeah.
Or this is so and so's mom. And I'd be like, okay, how many of these ladies have I had like conversations about where like we're not just talking about being a mom? Like, who are you outside of being a mom? And so I've started to try to like start with that question of like, what fires you up? And like, so tell me about your hobbies, your interests. And like, one of our talks, like, she told me, she's like, oh, I listen to podcasts like crazy. I have like, she's like 10 to 12 hours a week. And she like started telling me all about these podcasts that she loves. And we started like this whole interesting conversation of like this new entrepreneurship podcast she started. And I was like, oh, okay. I feel like I just learned a lot more about you as a person and who you are outside of just being so and so's mom. You know,
Yeah.
and so when I started that, I started to think of like myself and like through these conversations, I started to like kind of find my passions again as I was talking because I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot I love this. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of this like journey of self-discovery where I was like, oh, this is really like enlightening for me too. When I start to have these conversations and make an effort to talk about something different, I started to find some of my own passions again and start to remember that like, oh, I have a life outside of being a mom. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Totally. Okay.
It's
What
really
you
powerful.
Yeah, that is really powerful. You saying that about moms that you have a play group with has really like struck something within me. And I'm gonna do more reflecting on this, but I just want to kind of share it right now. I'm
Mm,
thinking about people in my life. I have quite a few friends that don't have kids, some that are just younger than me and aren't at a place where they have kids, and then some that are have chosen not to have kids. And so cool. We have that friendship. That friendship, obviously, those friendships don't revolve around our kids because they don't have kids. And then
yeah.
I have friends that have kids, but I think about the friends that I have that are mothers, and either I've met them in a capacity of, on this podcast, or like in a capacity where our kids weren't the focal point, or I knew them and was friends with them prior to having children. And I think about like going to drop off with my 5-year-old. He just started kindergarten, and like the mom's there. And like, honestly, the thought of trying to create relationships with moms who I would meet in the context of like, we are moms, sounds terrifying to me, because I think you have that, like, it's a crutch. It's a crutch in the relationship, having this, like, we have kids that are the same age.
Mm,
And just, that's coming up for me. I'm like, whoa, this is not something I've really ever thought of in terms of
yeah.
like why that would be. But I think it is just the default in those situations would be like, we're having a mom group because of our kids and things like that. And it's not necessarily about who we are as individuals. And so that's just a really interesting thing. I'm going to kind of keep playing with that and exploring that for myself, because it really is like, that's eye-opening.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that like all of your friends come like people you knew before you had kids
Mm-hmm.
or that, which I feel like I'm the opposite. Like
Yeah.
a lot of like, so I live in a small town. I'm not really close to family. And so I've had to kind of create my own village.
Mm-hmm.
And so my village has come from finding other moms and other friends, but then I also have a lot of friends that I've made that aren't moms. And
Yeah.
so it kind of has made me aware of this like interesting dynamic of like some of these ladies where I'm like, honestly, at the beginning, our only connection is that like we're both moms.
Mm-hmm.
And like we are all moms and we all needed a play group or a community. And for a while, that's all it was. And honestly, that's okay. If that's how it starts at first, lead with that. But then start to focus on like making those relationships more meaningful and think about like, okay, who is this person outside of being a mom? And then in that, you're going to discover for yourself as well and start to learn things about yourself. And so it is interesting Because, yeah, like so many of these ladies, I'm like, honestly, if we didn't start out as like being mom friends first, I don't know if I would have made this connection with you.
Yeah.
Because, like, they might, like, some of them are ladies that are like 10 and 15 years older than me that I'm like, without us like having like this thing in common, I don't know if there's a context that like I would have gotten to know you. So that's not a bad thing to lead with,
Mm-mm.
because now I love all these ladies. And I'm like, I'm so glad that we came together as moms and that brought us together. But also, I want to make sure that I'm valuing the relationship beyond that, you know?
Yeah, totally. I'm excited, like just on a personal level, that this has come up at such an early point in my own like school kids journey. Like my kid has just started elementary school, and that I get to reflect on this now and think about like what this means for me and like relationships I could
Yeah.
potentially make. It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's these things that we
You
don't
should
just think about.
you should totally be that mom at drop off that's like, hi, how's it going? What
What fires you
fires
up?
you up, Susan?
Yes. Yes.
She's like, please don't talk to me. I'm just trying to drop my kid off and leave.
That's me half the
I
time,
totally,
but
I totally would be. I totally would be that like slightly unhinged mom and drop off that's like, hi, Barbara, I see you. What's up, girl? And they're just like, please don't talk to me. I haven't had my coffee yet. My hair's a mess. Stop talking to me.
I might have
like,
to step
nope,
into this role.
we're gonna connect.
Yeah, I'm the one who shows up with my hair a mess and haven't had my coffee yet. So I can also be that person who is asking all the questions and getting to know people.
I do. Oh, I do too. Half
Don't
the time.
we all?
Oh, there was a time last week that we just put my daughter to bed. I need to run to the store to grab something. I don't even know what it was. And I just like got up and left. I didn't realize till I was in the parking lot that I was like still in my slippers. Straight up.
Love it.
Hoodie, leggings, and my slippers. And at that point I was like, I'm already at the store. I'm not gonna like turn around and go back to put shoes on. Like, we're just gonna embrace it. And then to make it even better, my slippers are like big fluffy blue slippers that say mom life on them. So
Love
great.
it.
And I was just like, this is it.
Accurate.
And I genuinely, I was like, and I genuinely didn't care. I was like, whatever. And guess what? No one else cared either. So I think no one cares if your hair's a mess. And the people that do care, you don't like them, and you don't need that kind of negativity in your life
right?
Anyways.
It really is.
So yeah.
That's the truth. Okay, I am like loving this conversation. Like I said, like just on a personal level too. I feel like, sometimes you just have conversations and something's said and it's like, whoa. And so that's totally how I'm feeling right now. I don't want to leave this conversation though without kind of picking your brain about boundaries, because I know that is something that in your professional life is huge. So I would love to talk about setting boundaries and just what that can look like for moms.
Okay. So where to start? I could do like a whole other hour-long conversation just about boundaries.
Yes. No, I believe it.
Okay, so to start, you need to understand, so there's 3 different boundary types: rigid, porous, and healthy. So I like to think of it on a spectrum. So on one end you have porous, and porous is the extreme people pleasers. You're hyper dependent on other people's opinions. You might be overly sensitive. You have a hard time saying no to people, have a hard time speaking up. That's like the extreme porous boundary. On the other end, we have rigid boundaries. And that is like the opposite extreme of, these are like ice queens, right? Like, you're super detached from people, don't have very many close relationships, you don't really ask for help, do not have a hard time saying no to everyone. You're just like very closed off and guarded. So neither of those extremes are healthy. So what you want to do is you want to find like that healthy middle ground where you have a healthy mix of both, which is really hard, especially when I'm talking. I feel like this applies to just like women in general, but with moms, I feel like it's just amplified. When I'm talking to moms about setting boundaries, their first thought that they have is that I'm telling them they have to be mean and that they have to like stop being a nice person. Because we have this idea that like having super porous boundaries and being a chronic people pleaser, that means you're a good person and you're super nice, which, yeah, you are super nice. But that doesn't mean you're a bad person if you set boundaries. And I feel like it's this narrative of like either or. You're either like a pushover, people pleaser, or you're a brat. There's no in between. And it's like, no. There is an in between. So when I tell moms, it's like, first off, challenge that black and white thinking of like, you're either really nice or you're not. Because there's a way for you to be nice while still setting boundaries. Now, next, I want you to think of that middle ground when it comes to setting boundaries and helping people. Try to think of like a compromise. So, for instance, one of my clients says that she was getting really burned out because her neighbor asked her if she could just pick her kid up for school every day. And at first it started, it's like, oh, can you pick my kid up and just take him to school? Like, you just live down the street. Yeah, it's fine. It's no problem. And then it kind of escalated to it was like an everyday thing. And my client was like, I'm getting worried. I'm tired because like, you know, if I'm running late, then like I'm also, this kid is late and I feel like this pressure, but I don't feel like I can say no because I'm doing it now and I don't want to be rude and I don't want to lose their friendship and like all this stuff. So in this example, the client was like, hey, I either suck it up and just give them a ride to school every day and run myself into the ground, or I be super mean and tell them I can never pick up their kid again. And then they'll hate me and friendship is ruined. And I'm like, no. There's a middle ground there. So we talked about like, hey, what's a happy medium? Maybe you could talk to the mom and be like, hey, I can pick up your kid on Mondays and Wednesdays. Or I could pick up your kid on Mondays. Wherever you're at. Maybe at this point you're like, just one day a week. I can give your kid a ride on Mondays. You know, and the other days, you know, you're going to have to find something else. You know, so find that middle ground where you're still being nice and helpful, but you're not running yourself into the ground. Okay, now the tricky part is some people just don't want you to set boundaries because they benefit from you not having boundaries. So in this example of this mom, the mom whose kid was getting a ride to school every morning, she had it made. Like, that's a pretty good system. And she seriously benefited from my client not setting boundaries, right? And like, we can all relate to that. Like, shoot, if someone will pick my kid up, that's fantastic. Then I don't have to get ready. I don't have to load him in the car seat and just send him out the door. Perfect. And so now I'm not going to make any assumptions like maybe that wasn't the intention of this other mom, right? But some people, when you do try to set that middle ground, let's say like my client calls this mom and is like, hey, I'm wondering if we could come up with a system where like Mondays and Tuesdays I give your kid a ride, or, you know, and then the other days maybe you could give my kid a ride and we could have like a tag team or something. And how those people respond is going to determine your friendship with them. And I'm just going to tell you how people respond to you making reasonable boundaries and reasonable requests says a lot more about them and their intention and how they value your friendship than it does about you. So in this instance, if this mom were to be like, well, I don't know why you can't do it. You've been doing it this far. Like, you just live down the street. It's not like it's that much extra time for you. I don't know why it's such a big deal. And they get like super passive aggressive and butthurt about it and like get angry. That's telling you that that person probably didn't value your friendship. They were just using you for free rides to school for their kid. Now, if this mom responds like, oh yeah, no, I totally get it. I've been feeling bad because I have realized you've been giving my kid a lot of rides. So yeah, let's talk about something. I'm totally fine with a compromise. Thank you so much. Right? Then you're like, okay, that tells me like, hey, maybe this mom was just tired and exhausted, and that's okay. We've all been there, and we can work on it, and like we can work on being like genuine friends. And I tell you this because sometimes we have this expectation that like, well, I'm still being nice and I'm like coming and like compromising and all this stuff, and because we're nice people and we would be kind to people, we expect other people to be kind and to be nice, which unfortunately isn't always the case. It sucks. I wish it wasn't, but that's the world that we live in. So you have to be prepared that not everyone is going to appreciate it, but that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means that you are shining a light on those relationships that are purely surface level and are purely based on you not having boundaries. So as you set boundaries, I will say, starting to set boundaries with people in the beginning can feel really lonely because you start to realize how many of your friendships are dependent on you not having boundaries. How many of your relationships are dependent on you being an extreme people pleaser. And as soon as you stop that, you start to realize those friendships die out as well. So it can be really lonely and isolating at first. And then the magic happens because it allows you to have true and genuine relationships. And you also start to find, and I promise you will, you also start to find people that you're like, oh, okay, these people are genuine friends who actually respect my boundaries. So that's, in a nutshell, if I could my little spiel to everyone is recognize that boundaries can be a compromise. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And prepare yourself that how people respond to your boundaries says a lot more about them and their relationship with you. And just keep reminding yourself of there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not being a bad person. I am just seeing this friendship for what it is. And if you need to take a break from that friendship after that, then that's okay, because then that's going to make room for more valuable, meaningful, authentic relationships in your life.
I feel like that right there, this idea of it making room for other more authentic things in your life is a really key point to boundaries. There can be some hard realizations, some hard interactions when you're setting boundaries. If you haven't been, all of that is so true, because like you said, people don't always react the way that we would or the way that we hope they will. And honestly, that's why setting boundaries can be so scary in the first place. But it really does make so much more room for you to have the energy, the time, the capacity to welcome in things in your life that actually are fulfilling and aligned in a way that when we're not setting boundaries, we don't have the opportunity for that. And so all of that, I think there's so much permission in what you've said, just about it's finding compromises, it's getting creative. It's not always just all or nothing, but knowing that setting the boundaries is important, not only for you, but for what is to come. And that's really powerful and something we all need to hear, I think, pretty regularly, because for a lot of us, that is a sticky point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell my clients, focus on what you are gaining and what you are adding to your life. Because in the midst of this, our mom guilt kicks in and we feel bad and we start to feel like we're losing some of these relationships. Sometimes it's easy for the focus to be on, what am I losing? I'm losing people. And so start to try to flip that switch and make that mental note or that effort to look at, what am I adding in my life? What am I making space for? And what you're adding is genuine relationships, and you're making space for genuine friendships. And I can tell you right now, it's better to have a small group of genuine friends than a large group of surface level friends who are just there to take advantage of you not having boundaries. Because that can be just as lonely and just as isolating once you start to realize that those relationships aren't reciprocated.
Yeah, that's one to sit with. That's an important reminder and an important realization, so that we can start to shift how we really treat ourselves and treat what we're deserving of, acknowledging that we are deserving of those really meaningful relationships that also support us in being these healthy, well taken care of individuals. I'm loving this conversation. You have so much goodness to say, and I feel like there's been quite a few moments that I'm yes, that's striking a chord with me, sending a light bulb moment, all of that. So I'm just super excited about this. And I know that we could keep talking about these things for, I'm sure we could go on for hours.
Yeah, easily.
But you know how these podcast episodes go. We don't want them to be hours long, because ain't nobody got time for that. So we're going to wrap this up. But before we do, a huge part of my platform is normalizing self-care for moms. And we have talked about that somewhat, what that means to care for yourself. But I love really just asking the guests on this podcast, how do you take care of yourself? And do you have any tips for moms to make sure that they are caring for themselves regularly?
Yes. So, this is actually funny. This has been the last couple weeks, like a realization and a conversation I've had to have with my husband. One of the things that I've learned that is necessary for me to take care of myself is I have to literally schedule in time to do things. And I know that sounds super simple, but what I'm talking about is like I put it in my schedule, and like that is an appointment, and that is an important appointment that is a regular part of my schedule. And I've talked a lot with my husband. He has a ton of hobbies. I swear, I don't know how. He just like collects hobbies, and then he's just like annoyingly good at them. Like he just like decided like a few months ago, like, oh, I want to try golfing. Golfing is really hard. And now he just picked it up, and it's so annoying. And I don't know how he just like collects all these hobbies. I have like such a struggle. I'm like, well, I don't know what my hobbies are. And so I've been like trying to like make an effort and really think, okay, what are my hobbies? But then I got stuck in this mode of like, well, I don't have time. When am I going to do that? If I want to go golfing, what am I going to do with my kid? I can't just, So for a long time, I was just kind of stuck in that mentality of like, well, I can't, so why bother? And so I talked with my husband, and we talked a lot about like, hey, what's a compromise? And so we started where we have a shared Apple calendar that is on like, both of our phones. And we will update and plan for our hobbies. So like if I add to the calendar like one evening a week, I'm going to go do this. I've decided I want to get back into running because I used to love running and it's been a while. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go running one evening a week. And I put that on the calendar, and that kind of puts him on notice like, okay, this is her time to do that. I'm not going to plan any my time to be dad and to be home with the kids so she can go do that. And vice versa, right? If he has hobbies or trips, he puts it on the calendar. I plan ahead for it. And that right there has made a big difference in communicating with him and being very clear rather than just like expecting him to read my mind, because that was a struggle for a long time. And then I get mad of like, why don't you just know what I want to do? Like, why can't you just do this? And again, treating it like it's an important thing, because if you have the mentality of like, okay, well, when I have time, a few minutes here, I'll like squeeze it in, it will never happen. Mm-hmm. So making that a priority, that's been the biggest thing the last couple of weeks that we've changed that has really made a difference for me.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be said about the logistics and communication that can go into moms being able to care for themselves, mm-hmm. because it isn't just as easy as just like making it happen a lot of times. And so I love that that's kind of like two birds with one stone. You're able to like plan ahead, make it like a legit thing in your calendar that you know is happening when your husband's going to be home because he hasn't scheduled for that time, right? But then also it like releases mm-hmm. the burden of having to like have a conversation about it, where it's like spending a lot of time communicating that you might not have, and you forgot to say it, and then he's gone and you're mad and there's resentment and whatever it is, when you can just kind of make that easy and just allow the self-care to happen, the hobbies to happen, because you've created a system to just eliminate all those mm-hmm. other challenges. It really is powerful. And I think that's a great like example of just creating ease around to those things and allowing the thing that you need to be the focus, instead of figuring out how to make that thing that you need happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I felt so dumb because like what you said of like, I would just have this expectation of like, okay, I want to do something tonight. And then he come home and be like, oh, well, I want to do something. And then I get mad mm-hmm. and like resentful and be like, I want to go do something too. Like, which like, he's like, well, okay, well, if you just would have told me, like, yeah, you can totally go do something. And then I'd be like, well, it's not the same. You should have just known. Mm-hmm. You can't just assume you can go everywhere. You should check with me first. Like, we've had this argument like round and round in circles. And so this was kind of this aha moment a few weeks ago of like, okay, let's come up with a shared schedule. So I'm not just like asking him to just assume to know, but also I'm allowing him to have hobbies. It's also not fair for me to just expect him to block off his schedule all the time. And, so anyways, so far we've loved it. It's been a great system.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to think about how that could possibly be a tool that I use in my relationship, because I think that is a really great communication tool. So it sounds like a great little useful tip that we can all take and see.
Yeah.
Maybe that would apply for our lives.
Yeah.
Sage, where can listeners find you if they want to get in touch with you or check out what you're doing?
So sageolsoncoaching.com. That's OLSON coaching.com. A lot of people think it's Ian. sageolsoncoaching.com. I also have my own podcast that I mentioned earlier. It Doesn't Martyr to Me. And yeah, those are the two main places. I have a blog. I'm all over Pinterest. I'm starting my Instagram. My Instagram is still very small, but I am on Instagram at Sage Olson Coaching. So any one of those places.
Amazing. And I definitely recommend, if you love the vibe of this podcast and the conversations we have, definitely go check out Sage's podcast. I love listening, and it's a great resource for moms to really like spend that time for themselves, which, I'm all about.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for being here. What a rich conversation, and just some really important things that we all need to kind of hear. Yeah. Normalizing these expectations, normalizing the breaking down of the expectations on moms is super important. So I just really appreciate you being here and bringing these points to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me and for giving me space to just ramble and rant about this stuff. I love it.
Love it. And all the nerding out on, Harry Potter, Star Wars. All welcome here.
the Muggle Mom podcast. I'm starting it.
I know, you got to let me know when that hits the airwaves.
That's amazing. Okay.
And thank you all for tuning in. You are worthy, Mama.